This tropical storm short summary is going to be looking at the 1973 Pacific hurricane season. We had a total of 12 storms from this season, as well as 7 hurricanes. We also had 3 major hurricanes, those majors being major, meaning Cat 3 and above, and those major hurricanes being Ava, Doreen, and Emily. We will not be discussing Emily. This season is just barely below the long-term average. In the course of the '70s, this was, I think, well above average, but in the grand scheme of recording in the East Pacific and Central Pacific, this is just barely non-average. The average being 13, 9, and 4, so 13 tropical storms, 9 hurricanes, 4 major hurricanes. This season had a relatively impressive ACE of 114, the 2 storms contributing the most to this being Ava and Doreen, and the totals from all of these storms is thankfully 0 deaths. Only 1 injury reported, although I would have to assume that there would be probably, like, 1 or 2 more perhaps, and an unknown amount of dollars in damage. We start with Ava. As you can probably guess from the A name, this was the first storm of the season. Ava first started on June 2nd, weakly headed westwards, and was slowly intensifying at this point, becoming a hurricane 2 days later, so we're now at June 4th. She reached her major hurricane status on June 6th, becoming a Category 5 on the 7th, and she would peak as a Category 5 with winds of 160 miles per hour and a minimum pressure of 915 millibars. She would weaken, of course, from here on out, being a 4 for a brief while, then a 3, 2, 1, then finally dissipating on the 12th. Ava is only the second known Category 5 in the East Pacific Central Pacific Basin. The other Category 5, the first documented, being Hurricane or Typhoon Patsy. Patsy was also called a typhoon because Patsy crossed the international date line, and at that point, the name shifts just because why not, right? Ava is, to this day, one of the most well-documented East Pac storms ever. Although despite this, her pressure data is relatively incomplete. It is estimated that Ava might just have a much lower pressure than this, or I think it might have been a little bit higher. I forget what the sources say. And at one point, Ava was even directly below Skylab at this point, so astronauts were able to take very good photos of Ava. Skylab and as well as a few other weather satellites. Doreen is a record storm. It is now a ninth record storm. Doreen would first form on July 18th, would then become a hurricane on the next day, and had a very short stint as a Category 4 on July 21st. That is this singular orange dot right here. As a Category 4, Doreen peaked with winds of 140 miles per hour and 972 millibars. Doreen had a separate minimum pressure of 968. Now, of course, both of these pressures are very high. This 972 being more situated towards being a Category 1 or even a weird Category 2, but as a Category 4, again, 972 is very high. This aside, Dringen would then weaken into a Category 1 and then was weakened further and steered very sharply to the south via a strong high pressure system that my guesstimate would be be sitting around north of Hawaii. As you can tell from the yellow dots here, very interestingly, Doreen would manage to re-strengthen as it turned more northwesterly, back on its more original path. Doreen would finally dissipate on August 3rd, however, taking a little southern trek, because why not? Doreen traveled an extremely far distance of 6,760 kilometers over the course of 16.24 days. Doreen ties the record set with Hurricane Celeste just the previous year, so 1972. Both of these hurricanes were outdone by Hurricane Fico only 5 years later. Fico would happen again 5 years later, 1978, and still to this day is the longest lived and furthest traveled Pacific storm, at least not in the western area, that has ever been documented. Moving on to Hurricane Ira. Ira formed on September 22nd, became a hurricane 2 days later on the 24th. Ira would peak at Category 2 strength with winds of 110 miles per hour and a loose minimum pressure of 955 millibars. The pressure documentation on the IRA is quite loose. I just realized I wrote NPH, and I'm just noticing that now. Of course, I've meant MPH. Sorry about that. Niles per hour, Nile rivers per hour, 110 Nile rivers per hour. Ira would landfall on Baja California, surprisingly as a tropical storm, not as a hurricane, like is seen here on on the map there. This was this year's strongest landfall, surprisingly. Ira would then make a second landfall in Mexico as a very weak storm and dumped just under 10 and 1/4 inches of rain on Sierra de la Laguna. Sorry, de la Laguna. My mistake. Ira actually also caused concerns regarding the splashdown of Skylab 3. However, the splashdown was not affected in any major way, shape, or form. The map here at the bottom right showing just when each storm occurred. This season is a little significant, mainly because of Ava and Doreen setting records. Ava at the time set many records and is still in the record books for many things. Ava to this day is still the East Pacific's earliest Category 5. At the time, it was the strongest Category 5 and also the longest lasting as a Category 5 for 24 consecutive hours. These records have been beaten, though. I hope that Patricia's 215 set in 2015 is not going to be beat anytime soon. Still to this day, Ava is the strongest June East Pacific storm and is tied for fifth as the most intense storm, specifically pressure-wise at again that 915. Ava would also start the longest gap between Category 5s or Category 5 equivalents anywhere worldwide at a staggering 7,712 days. For being the second most active statistically um, tropical storm producer, this is a very long time. And as mentioned in the beginning, this season was just below average. Again, the long-term average. However, that is the last point here. That Ira, again, very, very funnily enough, was the strongest landfall of this season, being a relatively strong tropical storm. All of the rest of the storms would impact Mexico at still as depressions, but just weak ones, and that's why their impacts weren't really recorded. But that is all that I have for the 1973 East Pack season. I thank you all so much for watching. I, of course, hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next video. Again, thank you so much for watching.